Welcome to Writer's Digest Presents. Hosted by the editors of Writer's Digest, this monthly podcast features conversations with writing and publishing experts whose insights will help ignite your creative vision, hone your skills, build your platform, and get your work out into the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writer's Digest Presents. I'm content editor Michael Woodson, and I'm here with the entire WT editorial team. Editor-in-Chief Amy Jones, Managing Editor Moriah Richard, and Senior Editor Robert Lee Brewer. Our May-June 2024 issue of the magazine is all about presenting conflict and emotion in fiction and nonfiction. So today, the editors are chatting all about conflict and emotion, both from a writerly perspective and a readerly perspective. Hey, everyone.
Hey.
Hey.
So just to kick us off, when you hear emotion and conflict, what comes to mind for you? Do you think of the emotions or conflicts that the characters are feeling? Do you think of the overall emotional quality of a book? Or do you think of your own emotions when you're reading or when you're writing something?
Mariah, I saw you. Go ahead.
So I was just going to say, when I worked with self-help authors, we always discussed how readers are inherently selfish. Like, you come to a self-help book thinking about your problem and how you're going to fix it. So I feel like similarly, I'm a very selfish reader. Like, I only care about how the work is going to engage me, how it's going to make me feel. And if we're talking about nonfiction, like, how are you going to teach me something? How are you going to keep me engaged while you're teaching me? So I would just say, like, it's all about me.
I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but I think you're right. I think I'm quite similar. It's to do with when I pick out a new book, I choose it based on how I want to feel. So that is largely impacted by what I have just finished reading. So I will either want something that is in the same vein and is going to make me feel similarly. So I'll pick something that I think is going to be similar. Or if it's something, if I've read so many heavy books in a row,
right,
I will say, all right, it is time to clear my brain. I need something that is for sheer enjoyment or is going to make me feel happy or that will make me laugh. So it's, and so inherently what I choose next is based on how the characters in the previous book made me feel, whether I was thinking about that or not.
Wow.
Yeah, I think I usually think of both how I want to feel, but and I think this is like an INFJ thing. Like, I'm always like reading like other people, so like I'm always like trying to anticipate how this story, like how their emotions are going to make my emotions feel. So I can't really like personally like pull the two apart because I just naturally like pick up on the emotions that surround me.
Yeah. Amy, you saying like the way something made you feel dictates what you pick next, and that is interesting. And I have found myself similar in the last several years, is that I'm not a very genre specific reader anymore. I'm a very much like a feelings reader, and I'm curious about how genre relates to this conversation about emotion and conflict, because kind of what you're saying, like the genre itself doesn't necessarily dictate how we feel emotionally when we're reading or writing. For example, I think what has become clear to me in the last couple of years is that people who read horror aren't reading horror necessarily to feel horrified. They read it because it's a comfort. Why do you think that is?
Well, my wife loves horror movies, and some people would think that like she just loves to be scared, but she talks about how it just comforts her to, like Halloween. She loves putting on Halloween, and it's just like all the fall ambiance and stuff. It just really comforts her. There just happens to be a lot of killing going on in the foreground, but she's, and her other favorite movie is Night of the Living Dead. Like, same thing. Like, I've talked to people from an older generation who like say like that movie made them like never go to sleep, for like
Totally.
weeks. But Tammy just thinks it's like the most comforting thing in the world to, have zombies running around eating people. So.
Yeah. Josh and I talk about it all the time, actually. Like I have an irrational fear of storms. And a couple weeks ago in Cincinnati, we had what could have been like a really bad traumatic storm experience. And every single meteorologist was telling us, like, take this seriously, have a plan. And I spent the whole day moving everything we owned into the basement, like everything we owned. And I couldn't separate like like we'll be fine with like maybe not. And it's funny because like one of our comfort genres of film is like disaster movies. We love The Day After Tomorrow, and it's because there's something cozy about like hunkering down and like people banding together despite like the odds. Is interesting. And as a reader, what I do that with historical fiction all the time. Like I really love reading historical fiction, but almost always historical fiction is like horrifying. Like it's like just reimagining like a pretty horrific time in history. Like I just read Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, and it's so sad. It's like about the death of a child, but I never wanted to finish it. Like something about it was really comforting and cozy, despite the fact that like the subject matter was telling me like that's not true.
That's so interesting because I don't read a lot of horror, so the idea of people being comforted by it, like I'm always surprised by that. Yeah. I've been reading more horror lately, or things that are horrific, but I guess I do a similar thing with like, apocalyptic type books.
Oh, yes,
I read a lot of those because I'm not living it, and I'm like, I see what could be, and I'm comforted by the fact that that's not happening yet.
Yeah, totally.
So it makes me feel, but the thing, like, I can't watch movies or shows that are like that because I see the images too vividly, and then I dream about them. But for some reason, I can read the books and feel some level of comfort that, yeah, this isn't happening. But the same with historical fiction, Michael. Like, I read historical fiction lots of times to learn, some version of what happened, even if it is a fictionalized version, and to appreciate, hopefully, how we've moved away from that in some cases, and to be reminded that we, in some cases, could go back, and we need to be like vigilant of that. So I read to feel those emotions of like reminding myself what could be and where we're not.
I really love this question, but I kind of want to like talk about something tangential that sparked for me. So if you would just like ride the wave with me. So like thinking about this from a writer's perspective, like I think reading is such a personal and individualized experience that like as writers we shouldn't even consider how we want our readers to feel while they're reading, because again, like I am somebody who reads a lot of horror for comfort, but I'm assuming that when these authors are sitting down, they're not like, I would like Moriah Richard to feel very comforted while reading this book. So I think instead we should really focus on how our characters are feeling and how they're reacting to those feelings, and also the mechanics of the genre that you're working in. So like specifically tension comes to mind for me, but like tension in a thriller is a lot different than tension in a romance, even though both of those things are super important to that genre.
Yeah, totally.
And it also kind of leads me back to the idea of like when you publish something or really release any kind of art, but like you kind of forfeit all of your intentions for that piece, right? And like just how you could write the most brilliant, beautiful piece of literature and you're still going to get negative reviews. Because like, again, reading is just like such a weird experience for people that like, it's not as important to me how the readers are going to react to the work, how am I going to react to their reaction?
Mm-hmm.
Matters more to me, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I have another genre question, but I want to jump forward a little bit because that, saying how I love that you said tension is important in these two separate genres, and how you approach them will be different because the genre suggests they should be different. And I think that is a challenge with writing emotion and conflict, is maintaining a level of realism within what you're writing. Like, not that it has to be realistic, but that it has to like make sense in relation to the story you're writing, your writing style, that sort of thing. So I guess my question is, what advice could we give to writers in maintaining believable emotion or conflict within the story they're writing? Because I think of, like, immediately a book that comes to mind for me is Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, where, like, it's such an emotional book, and it's a story, and the style takes place in a sort of old world version of like sensibilities of like what's proper and like social structures and stuff. But it's so subtle, and the emotion is really between the lines of like of what's happening, and these characters are kinds of characters who have been taught and trained not to evoke emotion. And it would be less emotional if the emotion was more overt than the rest of the book was. So the emotion also has to be subtle. Is just one example that came to mind, is like that would be less impactful if he'd been more obvious with like the emotion on the page, because the book itself was so subtle. So that sort of thing.
That's a really great example. I hadn't thought about that example in terms of this conversation, but I think you're spot on with that one. One of the things that I thought about with this is it's something that I don't think about a lot, because a lot of writers do it really well. But I think in terms of being realistic with emotion, it's finding a balance between like the overall emotion that you want to evoke. Like, the character is angry at this life situation, but they're not going to be angry all the time. There have to be those other moments where they've got something good happening in their life, because, you know, that's the way our lives actually are.
Right.
You know, I am really frustrated at this one situation in my life right now, but that's not my whole life. I still have, you know, lovely evenings and enjoy whatever, hanging out with my family, things like that. So there are still those happy moments that are balanced out with the frustrating moments.
Totally.
So I think that's, I mean, like I said, I think that's something that so many writers do so well, or they've edited their work and revised their work so many times that that's just inherently in there when we get the finished copies of the novels. But maybe it's something to think about as you're drafting the first time.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think for me, like, this is such a hard question to answer, because, like, again, like, what is realistic emotion? Like, I think, you know, it's so individual, and it just reminds me that like, recently I have kind of accidentally read a bunch of romance novels in a row that all had the insta love trope, which is a personal ick of mine. Like, I personally, as a human, cannot imagine falling in love with somebody who, like, doesn't even know my coffee order, let alone like my most treasured memories and like all of my special interests. Which is why, like, I love the friends to lovers or the enemies to friends to lovers tropes, because it gives the writer more space to like build that relationship. But like, who am I to say that insta love is unrealistic and that writers shouldn't employ that trope? But I think going back to what you were saying, Amy, like, to me, as an editor especially, like, if I can see the why in it, if I can follow that thread, like, even if it's as thin as like they have nice hair and they make me laugh, and I'm like, okay, if that's how you're falling in love with this person, like at least that answers the question as to why. Like, give me the thread and I will follow it. And I think that I guess would be my advice, is just to make sure that why is present somewhere in the work.
Yeah, and I think for evoking the emotion as well, it's really where it's been more effective for me, like both as a writer and also as a reader, is when you're kind of focused on the actions and the dialogue instead of just saying like this is the emotion,
Right.
that you're going through or feeling, like with the exception of first person narratives, of course, because they can be all over the map when uh, when they're narrating, but really just focusing in on those real types of, we have them every day. Like we might be feeling so many different emotions when we're having a conversation, and what we put out there may be a certain feeling while we're feeling all the other emotions that we're kind of hiding behind the one that's like our front. So as a writer, I always try to keep that in mind, and when I'm reading, when so much is going on in the story, and that this character must really be feeling a certain way, and then they act a different way. Like that's always very interesting to me, and I can always like kind of pick up and feel on like what, like I know what they're feeling and going through, but then they're doing this other thing, and like that's always like powerful to me and real.
Robert, do you remember? I don't mean to put you on the spot, so if you don't have an answer, we'll cut this out. But you're the poet among us. Do you tackle emotion differently when you're considering poetry versus your other writing?
I think I still kind of try to, like, I usually will come into a poem, like if I'm feeling a certain way. It's interesting, like I was thinking about like the whole emotion thing, and I was thinking, as a poet, I feel like I'm kind of more of an emotional poet. I try to evoke emotion more than ideas usually. I think the poems that are most effective with people, like there are times where I will just write ideas because I got to get it out of my head, but I think the ones that are more effective and that get published are more of like the emotional ones. And I might come into a poem with a certain emotion I'm trying to evoke, but usually to like finish that poem, I feel like I have to like really get it on, a certain metaphor or a certain situation in the poem. So like really focusing in on those concrete images, or again, like dialogue in the poems, and as you mentioned earlier, like that space that's in between that's happening there. So I do think probably, like, even though poetry's formatted different, how you put it together is different. I think I am still like kind of coming at it like from that same perspective that I would use in fiction.
Yeah. Let's go back to genre a little bit. And to keep this simple, I'm going to sort of draw out 4 basic emotions for us to think about: happiness, sadness, fear, and anger. Tropes play a big part in genre writing. And with that in mind, I am curious what you think. Does genre and do tropes dictate emotion and conflict, or does emotion and conflict reveal genre? Or neither?
When I was thinking about this question earlier, my first thought that came to mind was romance novels, because I was thinking when I pick up a romance novel, it's because I want to experience that happy ending. Like that is it's an expectation, and whatever mood I'm in that has prompted me to pick up a romance novel, it's because I want to feel happy at the end. But inherently, if there's going to be that happy ending, there has to be some sort of like conflict earlier that could potentially keep these people apart. And so I feel like that part, the conflict, might be more connected to a particular trope. but the end feeling, the happiness in this instance is connected to the genre because that's the convention. Like, you have to have the happy ending. And that's what you're getting into when you start it.
Totally.
But how the author chooses to get there and, disrupt their happiness, their potential happiness, I think is to do with whatever kind of trope they're using. I couldn't think of a specific example for that, but I think you could probably figure that out with, like you said, enemies to lovers or those kinds of scenarios. And I didn't think about it in terms of other genres because the romance one just really took hold.
No, it's a good one. Romance is like really diverse with regards to how it can make you feel at any given moment.
Oh yeah.
I wrote about conflict for the blog maybe in 2022. And from like what I remember of writing that article, like I talked about how tropes are a really easy way to employ conflict, and conflict is an easy way to use tension to engage your reader. So like Amy was saying, like, will the romance continue to build or will it peter out? Will the detective catch the murderer or will they get away? Will the characters succumb to their flaws or will they overcome them? But as you were saying, Amy, like there's a lot of different ways to employ tropes. And I have a specific example for this.
Okay.
So Josh Mallerman's upcoming release, Incidents Around the House, actually comes out on my birthday. Thanks, Josh, for a wonderful birthday gift. But I had the pleasure of being an early reader for it. So again, no spoilers, but at its core, it's a haunted house story. But what like really made the book different is that it's told from the perspective of the 8-year-old child who has been interacting with this entity, which she calls Other Mommy, for most of her life. And like, because of the point of view, the tension in the story stems from a completely different place than I'm used to. With like, for example, How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. That's another haunted house book, but it's about adult siblings selling their parents' home. So like the way that they interact with each other and their relationships are much different because they're adults and they're in control. Where Bela is the little girl in the story, she forces us into this passive role where like we just have to sit there with her and watch how this haunting is affecting her parents' relationships with each other, her relationships with her parents, and the intimate relationship between her and Other Mommy is like just so horrifying in so many ways because in a lot of ways she's not afraid. And that makes me more afraid. And I will say, like, as somebody who loves to read horror, just imagine me sleepless for many nights, rocking my infant, reading this book, weeping, silently weeping so as not to wake the baby up because I can physically feel Other Mommy standing behind me. Like, when I talk about like otherworldly tension, this book like really, really delivered. And all of this is to say that I believe like trope is the entrance to the conflict playground for writers. Totally. It's what you do with the trope that really makes your work like come to life.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's exactly when I think about genre and tropes, is that they're kind of like the springboard into the emotion, and then it really helps kind of launch people into it, because if they know this is certain genre, this is certain, well, even if you don't get to the trope yet, but certain genre, they're already coming in with a certain like kind of expectation. Now that there's a lot of times where authors will let their readers down on delivering on that, but the really powerful thing about genre and tropes is that you have people coming in like kind of in a certain state of mind, which kind of helps you then take advantage of that. And And tropes are like kind of like, the genre's already got them in that state of mind, then the tropes can help like, supercharge that and also set you up where you can either deliver on what they're expecting or kind of subvert those expectations at the last minute. This isn't a book reference, but the Stranger Things show, like I felt like that one of like when it's at its best, it's taking all these 80s movie tropes that people expect, setting it up, and you're like, oh, they're about to do this, and then boom, they do something else. So you get all excited, you're really feeling the emotion, and then boom, they do something else, which then delights you usually, because then you're like, oh wow, like I was totally set up, and now they're going somewhere new that's really cool. So tropes and genre just like set you up for those types of moments and emotions.
Yeah. Something I couldn't stop thinking about when I was thinking about this question was satire, because it is almost the exception to this conversation, in that like satire can be any genre at any point, and the overall, I think, expectation of satire is the same, like to poke fun or make fun or to make a statement about something. It is sort of the veil over genre, whatever that genre is. And that one was, I was getting like tripped up thinking about a like romance novel or a satire on romance versus a satire on romance, or especially horror. I think there's a lot of satirical horror, and that is always baffling to me when I'm experiencing it either in books or film, because sometimes they hide it really well, and I go in not knowing it's about to be satire, and then I am disappointed, because what I wanted was like to genuinely be scared, but now I'm like, oh, this is really silly, but that was the point.
Yeah.
Like what's it called? Is it Cabin in the Woods from the 2000s? They marketed that movie like it was a horror movie, like just a horror movie, and I saw it and it was bananas, and like it's supposed to be, and people loved it, and I was like, I don't get it. And so that I don't really have much to say about that, other than like satire was really tripping me up when I was thinking about this question.
Satire always trips me up.
Yeah, I love it, or I hate it.
I'm not very good at it.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah,
like reading it, understanding it.
Yeah, totally. We've talked about this a little bit already, but we've talked a lot in general as readers, like what our preferred genres are. But after putting together the major issue, it really got me thinking about the books I reach for with regards to the emotions and conflicts that those books explore. And it made me realize that I am more of an emotions-focused reader than I am focused on genre or style. Kind of because of what we're saying is that like any genre book has the capacity to make me cry or laugh or be scared, etc. And it really depends on my season of life. Like right now, I've really been drawn to books that are going to make me feel like nostalgic or laugh or even a little bit happy. But other times I'm in a season of life where I can handle maybe like heavier topics or sadder topics. And I'm just curious if this is true for all of you. Do you find yourself drawn to certain emotions in stories at certain seasons of life? And does that have anything to do with your writing? Like, are you drawn to writing certain ways based off of your season of life?
So I kind of have like two parts to my answer. I'm sure you're shocked. But I think for me, like part of the reason why I have preferred genres is kind of like hearkening back to what Amy was talking about with tropes, is like, I need you to fulfill an expectation that I have, which is part of why horror is comforting to me, because like I have certain things that I know are probably going to be delivered when I'm reading them, and like especially romance. Like I'm coming to this book, and you better make me feel X, Y, and Z, and so there's like a lot of comfort into that, or like going into books knowing that they employ a specific trope, like found family, I'm never not in the mood.
Yeah, totally.
For found family. But it's a little bit difficult to think about like how I select books like that I read for pleasure. And I think some of that is like my neurodivergence. Like I love sci-fi. Don't get me wrong, but like my brain has a really hard time reading sci-fi a lot of the time. And I think format also gets in there. Like, so specifically, Victor Manabow's The Sleepless. I started listening to that as an audiobook, and I was so frustrated. I was just like, what is happening? Who are you? What are we doing here? But like I knew that I liked the book. So I stopped listening to the audiobook. I got the physical copy from the library, and I was able to just like sit down and enjoy my reading experience. And that doesn't always happen. Like I'm a huge fan of audiobooks, but every once in a while I'm like, I can't do this today.
Totally.
If I'm going to actually engage with this text, it's got to be like on my e-reader or a physical copy, because I can't sit here and listen to this any second longer.
Yeah, totally.
I resemble that whole remark. But like I can't listen to audiobooks at all, because I can't follow the narrative. But I have that issue with e-readers, e-books versus physical books. Like there are certain books that I get, you know, an e-galley of for my e-reader, and I know I'm going to like it, but I can't comprehend it in that format. And so I have to get the physical copy. But as far as what I want to like feel with these books, I think it's to do maybe with what I hope the plot is going to do. You know, like or what the setting is going to do. So like it's no secret I really like Italy. I do.
No.
So when I know. We're shocked. So when I want to like remember how I feel when I'm there, or feel that happiness that I feel when I'm there, or whatever more specific emotion it is, I will find a book that takes place there. And I don't know if that's connected to nostalgia or some other like escapism kind of thing. So that's one way that I approach picking books that I want to read. But then I feel like there's also some sort of, Michael, kind of what you were saying, seasonality to it, but not like in terms of necessarily seasons of my life, but physical seasons that we have here.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like to read books that take place in winter during the summer. I only like to read books that take place in winter. And I don't know if that's because I can experience it more. Like I can imagine it better, the coldness that they're feeling, or the overwhelming snow that they have that interrupts their journey or whatever. But there are certain, like I read more light and happy books in the summer when things are lighter and happier. And I don't know that that is necessarily good for like the way my mind works. Because, you know, reading dark and cold and that kind of wintry book in the winter when I am dark and cold, and I don't know that that's good for me, but that's just the way it works.
Yeah. For me, I don't know that I think about emotion, and usually not even plot specifically when I'm choosing what to read. You know, thinking about it, like what I actually end up doing is picking up several books and reading the beginnings and seeing which one kind of latches onto me at that moment. And it's just, you know, I'm always surrounded by more stuff than I'm able to read, and that just seems to be the way that I do it, is like, what is speaking to me like right now, like what's actually pulling me in. And There are some books that I'll pick up multiple times over the years and I just can't get into them. And then when I finally do, like, I love them, but it's really like, and like, I don't know that this is the best way to do it, but like, that's the way that I do it is just, what's pulling me in like right now.
Totally. Format is fascinating. I actually didn't think about that at all until y'all were saying this, and it made me think of this book we read for book club, that I won't be saying because I just thought it was terrible and I like actively hated reading it. I was just like, this isn't thrilling. This is the anger I was feeling was not the anger it wanted me to feel. I was just angry to be reading it. And when we got to book club, the people who'd listened to it loved it. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me, because this was objectively awful. Of course it's not. But they were explaining why, and I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense, because the way this was written was that like every single moment was supposed to be thrilling and suspenseful, like how this person woke up and how they walked down the street and how like everything was suspenseful, so nothing was suspenseful. But the reading of it in the audiobook was like he'd whisper sometimes and then he'd be talking more loudly, like there was more emotional range. And I also can't really do audiobooks. I have a hard time paying attention to them when I'm listening to them. Not always. Sometimes I've listened to them and they've been lovely. But also because of like the opposite, I don't love to feel emotionally manipulated by the reading. Like I like to read it how I'm reading it. But in that instance, I could see how that would have been so beneficial. I never thought about format with emotions. That's really interesting. And
that's a really interesting point too, Michael. And I find this a lot in poetry. And if you go to a lot of poetry readings, there's the poem that you've read in your head, and then there's the poem is performed by the poet. And oftentimes, like, they're two different poems.
Totally. Yes. Which also kind of goes back to what Moriah was saying, which is how like it's up to the reader and not how they're going to feel versus what the writer, I guess, hopes Moriah will feel. Is interesting. I mean, our relationship with reading and books is fascinating as readers and writers.
That makes me think of something. The few audiobooks that are novels that I've read, listened to, and understood are the ones that are read by the author.
Oh.
In that way, they can like force you a little bit to feel the emotion that they want you to feel.
Sure.
Because they know how they wrote it.
I was going to say, like, Victor LaValle, he reads all his audiobooks. And I don't know if this matters. He's a professor. So, because I feel like not everybody could be an audiobook reader. I certainly could not be. I do not like to read my work aloud. But like he just is so gifted at it. And then Travis Baldree actually started as an audiobook narrator. So that's been his career for many years. And then he became an author, and he reads his own work for his audiobooks. And that was a really interesting experience as well. Especially because like he's very talented at voices. So like he's doing all these different voices, and I'm like, this is like a delightful experience to have you read this book to me. But it's can be the opposite where so my spouse read The Fisherman by John Langan and was like, oh my God, this will become one of your favorite books. You must read it with me. So we do a lot of like road trips and stuff, and he was driving. That's an important part of the story. And he kept putting the audiobook on so we could listen to it together. And I would just fall asleep, just like instantly, just gone. And I was like, I hate this book. I hate everything about it. It's the worst thing that I've ever listened to. And he just kept insisting, no, you're going to love it. So I just ended up buying the physical copy, could not put it down.
Totally.
Like, and it's not that the audiobook narrator was doing a poor job. It's just like something about his voice made me feel very comforted and very sleepy.
Totally.
So that's like the experience can be so wildly different depending on like if you're making up the context and everything in your own head, or if, like you said, like somebody's influencing
Right.
how it feels for you.
Yeah. And with regards to like season of life, I also was like never a season of life reader until the panini, and I was in a state of like chaos up here more than what is usual for me, and then I have like become since 2020 like, if my brain is becoming like is sort of boiling, then I need to and if reading is the thing I do most often, like I have realized my reading has really been affected by my mental health in a way that never was true before.
I do have a question. Like,
Yeah.
Do you guys ever feel like you read to poke the emotional bear? Like you're like, I'm very sad. I would like to openly weep.
So I have a really
give that to me.
Yeah, definitely.
I have an embarrassing movie version of that from college, you know, because like everything's a big deal when you're 21, and I was like so sad, and I knew I was going to have the house to myself, and I I can't believe it's not even that embarrassing, but like I was like, I want to cry, I need to cry tonight, and so I grabbed like the cheapest bottle of wine that a 21-year-old can afford. I ate the rest of my roommate's like jumbo pack of goldfish because she stole my food all the time, so I didn't feel bad about it, and watched Toy Story 3 for the purpose of like, I need to cry, and it worked. And I don't know if I do that with books though, but I do that with movies all the time. I think because it's much faster way to like get me. Like I have 2 hours, I need to cry right now. I'll watch to remember.
I am very much a like angsty reader, and I have some friends who will not take book recommendations from me specifically because, and this is like a direct quote, I don't like to read things that hurt me.
Oh,
and I was like, give me the pain, I guess. Make me feel all of the things.
Yeah, you're right. I think for me, I do it with movies, not with books, because you're right. It is it can be sort of a more contained experience. I mean, I do have certain books that I go back to and will reread. You know, if I know I've got some extra time and I want to be comforted in a particular way, but most often it is movies.
Yeah.
Like when I want to cry, when I want to laugh and then cry or feel sorry for myself a little bit, I will watch When Harry Met Sally.
Oh,
because I know I will feel a certain way.
Yeah.
And I can
a lot of ways.
tap into that emotion. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or Casablanca. That's the other one that I do a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. That one always makes me weep. Casablanca, yeah.
Yeah, if I really want to get in that emotional state, I usually actually go to music and pop on the Air Supply, and that really
nice
takes you down.
There's this YouTuber called HD Hayes who does like music reactions, and it's his whole thing. And we stumbled upon him, and he recently reacted to Beyonce's new album, and his reaction was so emotional. Like I was crying so hard just watching him react to the album. Anyway, if I was a fast reader, my skills are not in speed, but if I was a fast reader, I think I would do this more, because it is, I don't want to feel sad for like weeks, but if, and that's often how long it takes me to finish a book. But to Amy's point, like if I'm sad right now, I want to feel sad right now. And the fastest I can do that with is probably a movie or like an episode of my favorite shows. So, okay, to close this out, no WD podcast will be complete without some book recs. But we're going to put a teeny little twist on it. We're going to be recommending books to read when you're feeling a certain way, or you want to feel a certain way, kind of like what we're saying right now. So like books to read when you're feeling nostalgic, or books to read when you're feeling excited or exhausted or what have you. I can go ahead and start. I have a really bananas list, and I brought a lot because I wasn't sure what I want to talk about. But so a book that I want to read when I want to feel like cozy, and this has become a this author, you could read anything by this author, but I'm going to pick my favorite, which is Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. Her books are so cozy and comforting to me, and I think it's because I grew up in a Regency home. My mom loved Jane Austen, and I was late to reading her books growing up, but now they are just books that I never want to finish because they just make me feel so cozy. Okay, so talking about crying. And I'm a really, really slow reader. And a book that made me cry and then I sort of powered through was Before the Ever After by Jacqueline Woodson. It's a middle grade novel in verse. And it's just a really lovely story about a son and his relationship with his father while his father's experiencing like a traumatic brain injury. And there was a moment where I was reading it and my husband asked me a question and I looked up and I hadn't realized I was crying, and he was like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm crying right now." And then a book just to feel joyful. This won't come as a surprise to anyone, but it's The Guncle by Stephen Rowley. And mainly because for me to feel joy is not, I don't have to be like laughing and happy the whole time. I just have to feel joy from the book. And this book, like, you will feel sad and cry, but you will ultimately feel like hopeful and uplifted by the end of it.
That was a great pick. I'm glad you picked that one.
Thank you.
Me too.
I can go next. I brought a few as well. We were talking about seasons of life, and I recently read this Didn't See That Coming by Jessie Q. Sutanto. And I recently read, I think, 4 of her YA books. She might only have 4, I'm not sure. Only. In addition to all of her other many works. But this one, with her YA books, she taps in so well to the feelings that teenagers have, or what I remember feeling as a teenager, being like absolutely infuriated with the adults around me for not listening to what was going on or not seeing what was going on, not picking up on like the way they were treating the teenagers or the way the teenagers were treating each other. She does that so well in this book. So I like, if you want to remember that feeling of teenage frustration, or not necessarily angst, but infuriation at what is going on around you and feeling somewhat helpless about being able to stop it. But of course, good things happen because it's a good book. You overcome that feeling at some point. So I think that's a really good one for that. I mentioned books about Italy that make me feel like I'm back there, and this one does that perfectly. Still Life by Sarah Winman. It starts during World War II, and part of it takes place in Florence and the countryside around it, and then part of it takes place on the East End in London, which is the area that I visited when I was there. So it kind of hit both of my like travel loves, the East End and Florence. But then one of the characters goes and lives in Florence for an extended period of time, and it just captured the sense of community that you feel in that town, because it is a city and there are lots of tourists there, but I think you can see, if you're there for long enough and can watch people, you see little communities of people, and you learn about the communities in that area that help each other out during troubled times. And this book it's perfect for capturing the essence of Florence, I think. And then one more, Prophet Song by Paul Lynch. It was hard for me to get into at first because the way it's written, there are long paragraphs. There's no dialogue marks or quotation marks or breaks for changing dialogue. So like the format, I had to get in that mindset. But I think I was just emotionally raw after finishing it. Sweet. Because it starts off kind of innocuously, you know, like something is changing in Ireland and you're not quite sure what, and you don't know how bad it's going to get. But you follow this family, this mother in particular, and her children as things just kind of fall apart. And you keep hoping that something is going to, you know, be fixed for them. But you just don't know. You just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And there's so much tension in it, and it's just visceral, raw emotion. I don't know that I can really say much more about that without
giving too much away.
ruining it. But
yeah,
boy, it is a fantastic,
wow,
fantastic read.
It's been on my list since it came out, and I need to do it.
Yes, it is. It is worth it for sure. I think I'm actually rereading it a little bit right now on accident. With all my Post-it notes. Anyway.
Okay, I can jump in here. I've just got two. And when I was first thinking about this ahead of time, I thought, you know, of different genres. Like, I'm going to do a horror, I'm going to do a rom-com, or, you know, I'm going to do something where it's like easy to show the emotion. But the more I thought about it, I came back to the Lord of the Flies, which, like, getting back to where we were talking earlier, like I mentioned earlier, like I'll read the beginnings of books and like
all the time,
you know, put it back down and stuff. This was one where I picked it up, I don't know how many times over the years, and just could never get into it. But like I kept it around because I'm like, I got to read it sometime. When I eventually did, it's probably like the most emotionally like draining, like hopeless book that I've ever read. And I don't know if part of this is because I read it as a father and a father of 4 boys. So, but it just, I remember like finishing it and just feeling so like emotionally like hollowed out and hopeless. And I know like for some people, like they'll hear that and they'll be like, well, I'm staying away from that. And that's fine. But for me, like I like to sometimes just like really dive deep into an emotion, and it's just like probably at the top of my list for how it made me actually like feel. And like even now, like just seeing the title, like I start to feel like that hopelessness like kind of come in. Like I don't even have to read it again. And then on the completely reverse side of that, I've got Ross Gay's catalog of unabashed gratitude. And while it covers like a whole range of emotions, like kind of like that underlying heartbeat is this sense of gratitude and joy that, you know, it's just a delight to read.
I love that.
So I have 4 recommendations, and in the spirit of like booktubers who do super specific book recommendations, I'm going to give 0 context. So if you want to be scared to be in a room with a doll for the rest of your life, I recommend How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. If you want to feel the past rearing its ugly head, I recommend Indian Burial Ground by Nick Medina. If you want to laugh while falling in love, I recommend Late Bloomer by Maisie Eddings. And if you want to experience the entire range of human emotion while reading a book, I highly recommend my current love affair, which is the Emily Wilde series by Heather Fawcett, which has me by the throat and has not let me go. So those are my recommendations.
Oh, love that.
I literally finished Indian Burial Ground by Nick Medina last night. So
Did you
good.
like it?
I loved it. It's what, like, I think it kind of verges on that horror, you know, thriller horror line, and it was just phenomenal. I couldn't put it down.
Wow.
It is one of those books where, like, when you have to put it down, you're still thinking about it, no matter what you're doing. It's a good one.
I even slacked you about that yesterday morning, I think, because I had to stop reading it to come to work to do my job, and I could just think about it all day. Like, I'm at this critical point. I need to know what's happening, and I couldn't pick it up until after work.
I just got through like a very sleepless time with my baby, and that was one night because I read on my Kindle on my phone. So she was asleep in my arms, and I was like, I should probably put her in the crib, but like, I just need to get through this chapter. So she got a little extra time with me because I was like, I need you to just be here with me while I finish this chapter.
I usually don't do plugs for the website on these podcasts, but Nick, since we've been spending so much time on him and his book, actually just wrote a guest post on writing supernatural horror on the writersdigest.com website. So anyone who's interested in learning more about that, you can find him. Find him there too.
Perfect.
Yeah. Plug away. Well, this was really fun. Thanks, everyone. This was an interesting conversation about something that's like super specific. But, you know, we have such busy jobs. This felt a little bit like happy hour because we don't get a lot of time just to sit and chat. But yeah, thanks. This was fun.
Yeah, it was. Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you for listening to Writer's Digest Presents. Join us next month where we'll be discussing book and cover design. Until then, you can find us online at writersdigest.com or follow us on social media at Writer's Digest.